This is an RNZ podcast.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. Last weekend we heard about calls for action on the dangerous crash tackle spectacle called Run It Straight and the debate that drew in the Prime Minister, the Police Minister and plenty of pundits. But this week there's also been a bit of a backlash and even claims of double standards about other stuff that's not exactly sport and not exactly safe, but gets celebrated in the media and not condemned.
Some pretty serious injuries chasing after some cheese.
I guess you could call it that, yeah.
Was that a good idea in hindsight?
We'll look at that later on in the program, but our big focus this week is on our two biggest publishers of news, both making big calls. In fact, they did it on the same day. Stuff twinned up with TradeMe on Tuesday morning, and in the afternoon, NZME changed a chunk of its top brass and brought in a self-described agitator from overseas. Now, one thread running through both these moves was profitable property platforms that are now at the heart of both businesses. So, is this a good thing for important news outlets that really need money, or a plague on both their houses?
A major board shake-up at Newstalk ZB and NZ Herald owner NZME is expected to take effect this afternoon. It's the first annual meeting since Canadian billionaire Jim Grennan acquired a 13% stake in the company.
That was Newstalk ZB newsreader Niva Retimanu on Tuesday morning telling listeners about impending changes at the top of Newstalk ZB's owner. Now, essentially, this was a routine business news story about shareholders voting for change at the very top of their company, and often such stories are only really of great interest to other shareholders and clients of the company, or maybe those of its market rivals. But a headline in the Herald that same morning made this one sound much more dramatic. NZME's D-Day is finally here. But there was no storming of Normandy, bullets flying or blood on the floor on Tuesday afternoon. In fact, it all played out pretty much as Niva Retimanu said it would in the morning.
A battle for the board played out publicly, with Grennan leading a proposed clean-out. But last month, the company and major shareholders landed on a new group of proposed directors, with former National MP Stephen Joyce set to be chair.
But on Tuesday afternoon, there were shots fired by NZME's main rival in news publishing and newspapers.
So the strategy behind this investment is really to bring together two of New Zealand Aotearoa's most iconic and most trusted brands. And it also brings together two of New Zealand's largest audience platforms. And we're just super excited about what this can do for Kiwi going forward.
Well, it was Anders Skow, the chief executive of TradeMe, announcing that his business is going to take a 50% stake in Stuff, New Zealand's biggest publishers of news and employer of journalists, or to be precise, Stuff Digital, the online wing of the company that doesn't include the newspaper mastheads like the Post, the Press and their websites. And sitting alongside TradeMe's top man was Sinead Boucher, the sole owner of Stuff, well, until this deal goes through.
We have the same sets of values, the same commitment to wanting to have a positive impact on the lives of New Zealanders, and I think we're going to produce some really great things together.
So Stuff and TradeMe have had a commercial relationship for a number of years now, and we just felt now with the opportunity to invest in Stuff Digital that the time was right to take that relationship to the next level.
Now, what's in it for TradeMe is pretty clear. More eyeballs from Stuff for stuff on sale on TradeMe. But what's in it for Stuff and for us, the consumers of its news? Well, later we'll ask Sinead Boucher about that. But as was flagged on ZB News, the former radio entrepreneur and senior government minister Stephen Joyce is now in the chair at NZME because the activist shareholders wanting to roll the existing board and change the chair and the CEO had reached a compromise with them last month. Peace in our time then at NZME, for the shareholders at least for now. But what does this change at the top mean for NZME customers, New Zealanders who number in the millions? Because NZME owns a really big slice of this country's media, including the biggest selling daily paper, the New Zealand Herald, in print since 1863, and the top selling Sunday paper, the Herald on Sunday. It also owns the Gisborne Herald, the Northern Advocate, the Whanganui Chronicle, and other daily and community papers in the North Island. Its NZ Herald News website and app have a huge national audience as well, and more than 150,000 paying subscribers paying for premium content. And NZME also has half the country's radio networks, including the country's top-rating talk station, Newstalk ZB. Now that's based in Auckland, but still has local morning shows in Christchurch and in Wellington, which just last week had the Prime Minister in for a full half hour.
You quite like that, didn't you?
I did like that.
Yeah, that's New Zealand country music. Kaylee Bell, she's big in Australia, big in the US, probably not that well known in New Zealand, but all from Timaru, from memory. So amazing young woman.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DJ Christopher Luxon.
Good to be with you, Nick.
And speaking of country music, NZME has just added I Heart Country to its music radio roster, alongside the hits, ZM, Flavour, Coast and Gold, which also carries live sport coverage for big games. Gold also carries its rural show The Country, based in Dunedin, but with a national online audience as well. And on top of all that, and maybe worth even more than all that on its own, NZME's online platform for news and ads about property, One Roof, which posted a 50% leap in revenue last year. But while NZME is clearly a big and influential business with a huge audience of Kiwis, media is a tough business these days. NZME posted a net loss of $16 million last year and made several senior journalists redundant in January. And that's among the things that those activist shareholders say they now want to change. And one in particular, James Grennan, the Canadian billionaire who's lived here for 12 years but had such a low profile that there were only 2 photos of him to illustrate the many media stories about his recent bid to take control. Now, he's been quoted in the Herald and in the Post during his campaign for change at NZME, but never been interviewed on TV or radio about that. In fact, never been heard in public at all until last Tuesday's shareholders' meeting.
In Canada, we have a sport, it's called ice hockey, and you have agitators in that sport sometimes, and maybe I should have been a little more graceful here, but in any event, I tried a little Canadian style.
Now, James Grennan has only been an NZME shareholder since February, when he bought between 9 and 10% of the shares, just as an investment, he said at the time. But he told the board in a letter that he wanted to be the chair and to act like an owner-operator who would delve into the operational details to be able to challenge management and, he said, to have editorial influence. Now, this raised eyebrows given that his previous media ventures were alternative news sites, highly critical of the Herald and other local news media. And it's still criticising the Herald's journalism and commentaries that are mostly anonymously written. Now, this kind of agitation of NZME is something that didn't come up specifically in Tuesday's shareholders' meeting, though James Grennan was asked by another Canadian shareholder, coincidentally, if he would inject more balance on the topic of climate change.
They can't tell the editors exactly what to say, but can they make sure that there's balance? Climate change would be a main issue for me. I think that's very important, and there should be some balance in that.
This is just me, of course, because there's a whole board and an editorial board. But ultimately, there's very few businesses that you really can try to look over the shoulders of your staff as they're performing the business. And I don't know that writing is a heck of a lot different than that. But you can have general guidelines, and you can also score after the fact and see how are you doing at meeting these guidelines. And if they aren't meeting the guidelines, you can sort of nudge them in the right directions. And maybe I would like to see.
Now, the issue of whether and how directors or the proposed editorial board that James Grennan wants for NZME would nudge and score its journalists is a question yet to be answered. In his final notes for the NZME shareholders' meeting, James Grennan also said that he thought AI might help scan the Herald's journalism for political bias. Journalists at NZME told Mediawatch earlier in this boardroom battle that if the Herald was bent on turning into a kind of Fox News or Sky News Australia type operation with clear and persistent agendas injected into it, then they wouldn't be a part of it. And even if they didn't, it wouldn't help the Herald build on 150,000 subscribers paying for premium content. In his address and answers to questions at that shareholders' meeting, James Grennan didn't give any hint that that's what he really wanted. But why did he seek to be the chair and now seek a seat at the NZME top table? Well, partly because he said the business was underperforming and some executives were overpaid, and he told the shareholders this on Tuesday.
It seemed to me that things were drifting downhill from my perspective in any event, and these things are often subjective, particularly in the editorial front. And I thought, well, maybe I can sort of jumpstart something here, and I'm very, very delighted with the way it seems to have worked out.
Among three others that James Grennan initially wanted on the NZME board to be chaired by himself was lawyer formerly based in London Philip Crump, who previously blogged and broke the odd story under the pseudonym Thomas Cranmer, an Archbishop of Canterbury who was executed for heresy. And this wouldn't be his first gig at NZME. In mid-2023, Philip Crump was appointed as the editor of ZB+, billed as a go-to platform for news and commentary for paying subscribers. At its launch, he described it like this.
We intend to build a new voice in New Zealand journalism that tackles the biggest issues in the country, breaks news and stands up for everyday Kiwis. Nothing will be off the table.
But ZB+ was off the News Talk ZB website a few months later. Not enough people, it seems, went to his would-be go-to platform. And the otherwise complete lack of media experience among James Grennan's other nominees startled the NBR's senior business journalist Tim Hunter. Under the headline, "The would-be NZME Emperor has no clothes," he wrote this back in March.
Someone has to call it. The media business credentials of Jim Grennan and his associates seeking control can be summed up in one word. Zero.
Tim Hunter said that James Grennan's push for control of the company, built on a relatively small stake, was gobsmackingly aggressive, and on social media his NBR colleague Mike McRoberts read out Tim Hunter's blunt take on that this way.
For a 10% shareholder to demand just one board seat would show extraordinary chutzpah. To push for control of the entire board is an assault of blitzkrieg proportions.
And more eyebrows were raised in NZME newsrooms when the lobby group the Free Speech Union confirmed that it initially encouraged James Grennan's investment in NZME. The union said it had aimed to take back institutions one at a time, and NZME had been targeted because of its refusal to publish further advertisements for Hobson's Pledge, after copping criticism for putting a previous campaign ad for the group on the front page of the Herald. The main journalist trade union E2 called on James Grennan to guarantee he would not interfere in NZME's editorial decisions. And NZME's board at that time said it was also concerned that Grennan's takeover bid was an effort for, as they put it, control over a newsroom rather than anything else. Claims and counterclaims about that were then exchanged in letters between the parties, but in April Grennan claimed resistance was futile, while he also acknowledged some of his backers were softening their support, and he tweaked his proposals. Now, former Herald editor Gavin Ellis reckoned that the choice of Stephen Joyce now to chair the board was a key calming factor, and that he understands the editorial independence and the Fourth Estate role and the danger of overreach. And in fact, he said as much at Tuesday's meeting.
In the editorial division, so the board has some important role, but the board also shouldn't be making individual decisions about individual items, unless I can't think of an extreme example. Perhaps one appears, but in the general course of events anyway.
Now that's the NZME board he's talking about there, but what about this new editorial board? Well, Stephen Joyce gave a long answer when asked about that, but an interesting one.
The editorial board has been raised both by the existing board and by Jim Grennan, and they are quite common internationally with some newspapers are providing additional advice and support to the editorial team. I actually think that has the potential to strengthen the editorial offering of the New Zealand Herald. And I think it's particularly important too, as the number of, voices in the media has shrunk over time, which is a factor of the rise of social media and the metas and alphabets of the world. So I wouldn't fear it. I think it's an opportunity to debate editorial policy, an opportunity to support the development of editorial policy, the thinking of editorial policy. I think in every business we can get very, very busy in the day-to-day, and I know journalism is one of those businesses. So it's that opportunity to test that thinking independently, and I don't think it should be feared. I think it should be encouraged. And certainly I can assure you that the board's view will be whatever it does in this space will be to try and enhance and strengthen the editorial offering of NZME and not do anything else.
James Grennan wanted Philip Crump, also a recent government appointee to the Waitangi Tribunal and the board of New Zealand On Air, to lead the editorial board to scrutinise Herald journalism. But Philip Crump has declined to discuss that vision on Mediawatch last month and again this week. Later this month he indicated might be the right time. But another big concern of the shareholders and the nominees was the performance of NZME's online property platform OneRoof, a source of rapidly rising digital revenue and profit. The outgoing board was already looking at ways to maximise its value, which could include splitting it off from the rest of NZME with separate governance and management, or even selling it off. Just last month, Stuff's former owner in Australia, Nine Entertainment, sold its own property platform in Australia called Domain to the American real estate firm CoStar for an eye-watering $3 billion Australian dollars. And the fact that Stuff's new marriage with TradeMe would be competing with OneRoof didn't go unnoticed at NZME's AGM.
As of this morning, we're dealing with an integrated media enemy, TradeMe, with a newspaper group attached to it, the Stuff people, and we're dealing in competitive terms with that company that last year paid $2.1 million worth of tax on $239 million worth of EBITDA. Now, there's no doubt that this board should agitate with the New Zealand Tax Department, go after these thin capitalisation companies and make sure it's a level playing field between New Zealand Herald and TradeMe in respect to the future.
That was NZME shareholder Roger Coleman there describing the Stuff TradeMe partnership as a fully integrated enemy. Well, it's obvious what TradeMe gets from that marriage. To use Sinead Boucher's own description, the eyeballs of Stuff users on Stuff for stuff that's on sale on TradeMe, especially houses. But what does Stuff Digital get out of it? And the audience? And Sinead Boucher herself. Yeah, you've said that before other outfits have approached you about either investing or partnerships, taking a stake or whatever. Why have you resisted till now?
They have to be the right fit culturally, be on the same page around things like the, sanctity of editorial independence. I remember one call I fielded from someone who wanted to buy one of our local papers. So they thought they wanted to change the mayor of the town. People who looked at wanting to buy a whole media company for the power that a media company influences on the public agenda. We had to mix together the right partner at the right time, who we knew would be able to contribute something, that partnership would actually contribute something to the growth of Stuff as well and offer up new opportunities. And I think it's clear that TradeMe will bring plenty of that.
Well, what opportunities, what growth is there? What does Stuff actually get from this arrangement of carving out 50% of its digital wing to them?
We obviously had sold that to them. So, there is a capital injection there that we will, use to do all sorts of things.
Oh, how much of a capital injection roughly would that be?
Good try, Colin.
Okay.
No, we are going to keep the terms of the deal, any finances around the deal or the structure of it completely confidential. But in terms of these sort of opportunities, I think, you have New Zealand's largest audience through us, huge news information site, and you have the country's largest marketplace and biggest property site and motoring site. And we're going to start with really enhancing the Stuff property section and rebranding that to TradeMe Property. And, we will still have our great editorial content that property team writes for us every day. And there'll be, some added features in that section coming along, which I think will be really beneficial to our audience and to customers as well.
So this substantial investment, let's call it that you say they're putting in, does it also, we know the media is a tough business. We're hearing all about it from NZME and their results and think the economy not picking up like they'd hoped. Does this also enable you to maybe shed some liabilities, maybe even a bit of debt we don't know about because, you don't have to front up to shareholders about how your company's performing financially?
The reason we're bringing in a partner now is because it allows us to expand and do more and to keep growing in future. So, I think it certainly, gives us more opportunity there. But we've been doing quite nicely on our own, thank you.
And I suppose unlike NZME, you haven't had to, say, pay dividends to shareholders, and even in difficult times when it's hard to find that money, you haven't had to do that. Yeah,
well, look, we've just been investing all of our earnings back into the company, through those years. They've gone so quickly when I think about it in terms of, how much we have done. We launched a whole suite of new digital subscription sites 2 years ago. We repositioned and relaunched the Post, mastheads like the Post. We have taken on the contract to produce 3 news. So now we will jointly work on Stuff Digital and growing that business together.
But why a 50-50 split? This is intriguing. Why not a sort of 51-49 kind of thing, so that you can be absolutely sure you'd still be in charge? And how will decisions be made on this 50-50 basis between the two companies?
Various reasons it sort of ended up that way, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it. As sort of we announced yesterday, there will be a board for Stuff Digital, which comprises two members of the Stuff Group, myself and Fabian Go, and two from TradeMe, Anders Sko and Alan Carr. Work as a board. I will be the chair of the board, and I have the casting vote on that board. So I'm really, really comfortable with how that's landed.
But TradeMe is way bigger than Stuff. What if they want more say? They want to make it, I don't know, 60-40 or something like that. Will you be able to resist that?
Well, I mean, I'm not anticipating a scenario like that happening at all. We are both now co-owners of Stuff Digital, and we'll both be focused on growing and developing that business equally.
But what if they want more bang for their buck, or they do want more of a presence, or maybe want to do things that perhaps you wouldn't ordinarily be inclined to agree to, pumping them up the site or something like that?
Well, the business continues to run operationally independently. TradeMe is very happily in support of an editorial independence. They will have absolutely no say on the content that goes on the site. So those kind of scenarios, of course, they have come up and just been discussed, and all sort of, as we've gone through the last few months, to make sure that both sides are perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. And so I don't anticipate anything like that happening at all.
But would that preclude, say, if you wanted to sell to someone else or felt that would be better, you need more money in, you want to find another partner, would that preclude, would they want, say, first option on buying any further shares or something like that? Has that been discussed?
You're starting to touch on what would be the sort of confidential terms and structure of the deal, so I can't really comment on that in any detail.
What then will the readers get and the customers notice? It's a little bit abstract, isn't it, when you say, there'll be this investment, there'll be this growth. What do you think the difference will there be? More journalists employed and more things to read? Will there be new sections on Stuff Digital?
Over the last few years, we have continued to add new things and new sections and new roles and new kinds of content, and we will definitely be continuing to do that. But we're not going to lay out cards all on the table right at this minute. In terms of TradeMe specifically, I think what people will firstly notice is a much improved and revamped property section, which naturally makes sense given we have a huge audience super interested in everything to do with their homes. TradeMe has all the data and expertise and insights, obviously the big transactional part of their platform as well. Lots of opportunity to make a much more improved property section. We'll be following not too long after that with motoring. And then, let's see what comes after that.
Was TradeMe not interested in a stake in the masthead side of the business as well? And if they're not, does that mean that now the NZME boardroom stuff is settled, or appears to be, that you might entertain their previous approach of trying to acquire some of your mastheads?
Well, our discussions with TradeMe have always been around the digital business, and I think, we spent the last 2 years sort of separating into two distinct, strong, standalone, profitable businesses that operate independently, and that naturally made it easier for us to have those good discussions with TradeMe in relation to stuff.co.nz, where there is a really clear, natural partnership between, the country's leading marketplace and the country's leading news website. In terms of our masthead business, which has moved very strongly to become a digital-first business, focused on subscribers, focused on new kinds of content and experiences for customers, my intention is to keep building that and keep growing that. NZME may still have interest in that, but that is not on my radar at this stage at all.
Michael Boggs, the chief executive of NZME, in their shareholders meeting on Tuesday, did say when he was asked, yes, we're still interested, so he might be in touch.
He has my number, but I've got my own things going on at the moment, and I'm not intending to do anything with that business at this stage.
It was funny. One of the shareholders referred to Stuff at the NZME meeting. He said we're now facing what he called a fully integrated enemy. And when you consider, like, you have Domain, from your former owners, Nine Entertainment in Australia, $3 billion, I think, that changed hands from their property platform. Is property content now kind of as important to supporting the digital news media, the modern news media, as all other forms of advertising were in the past? And is that where it's at now? The property is the main real source that you need to partner up with?
No, I wouldn't say that. Property content is like a really important mix for our audiences, and that just sort of reflects how important property, all things about property, buying, selling, saving, where are the mortgage rates at, all of those things are have always been very well-performing content on our site, just reflecting the position it holds in people's lives.
And is this actually a done deal? Because, there's possibility the Commerce Commission might have to look at it, and Trade Me is not owned onshore anymore, is it? So would there be Overseas Investment Office permission required? There's still some hoops to jump through before this actually becomes signed on the dotted line.
Anders Sko, the Trade Me CEO, did say yesterday that they had notified the Commerce Commission and had received a positive response there. They're not intending to seek clearance or that sort of process through Comcom. And they've also notified the Overseas Investment Office from the point of view that staff or a media business like staff is a important strategic asset within the New Zealand ecosystem.
And just before we go, there was in the NZME meeting, the same shareholder we mentioned before, Roger Coleman, told the chair at one point, look, we're up against this enemy, as he called it now, your Trade Me Stuff partnership. They don't pay a whole lot of tax, Trade Me. They're a big company with big turnover in New Zealand because of the way they're structured. And he was encouraging the chair to sort of encourage the Inland Revenue to investigate and so on. Are you concerned that that is an issue you might have to confront, that there might be other players in the market who think you might have a bit of an advantage if they consider that Trade Me, or might have an advantage through being able to change their tax arrangements?
Anything about that would be a specific issue for Trade Me, but I would say in all of our
Well, it'd be an issue for your company if you're 50-50 with them and Stuff Digital.
Well, no, they're a shareholder for Stuff Digital, but any tax matters related to Trade Me is their own affair. But what I would say is that I don't think you could get a more Kiwi company than Trade Me in its essence. Everything they do is for and focused on New Zealanders.
It's owned by a British investment fund, though, right? So.
NZME also has overseas investors in it. This is the way that it goes for our large companies. I'm not surprised that NZME has got the jitters about this. Obviously, give them a knock in terms of their own ambitions around content and property. Ultimately, all of this competition is much healthier for the consumer.
Finally, you took a big risk 5 years ago, that NBO, the $1 symbolic dollar that you acquired it for, but you were potentially buying a liability as well. So now there's investment coming in from Trade Me. Is this something that, having taken a risk, 5 years of hard work, that you're personally going to benefit from the undisclosed level of substantial investment coming from Trade Me?
There's a lot of misconception about the risk that I took back then. I was just super fortunate to be given a chance. It was a unique moment in time around COVID and all sorts of things that take on a company for $1 that was profitable, that had cash in the bank, that was growing. I've done everything I can in the last 5 years to capitalise on that.
Finally, we're getting a bunch of emails here at Mediawatch from people going, oh my God, does this mean we're going to see heaps of bogus news stories about quirky Trade Me auctions, mixed into our politics news and cultural news and business news?
I don't know why on earth anyone would think that. We've made it really clear, and as is Trade Me, that they are completely hands-off in relation to any content, any involvement in the day-to-day running of the business, and especially in anything to do with the editorial part of the business. We have often run the stories about quirky property stories and auctions and things, and you can be sure that if you do see any of those stories, it's because our editors have independently judged them as newsworthy and it's streamed to our audience, not because of our ownership.
Sinead Boucher, the owner and chief executive at Stuff, which announced the sale of 50% of its digital wing to the online auction platform Trade Me last Tuesday. And as we heard, the same day, NZME changed its top brass after its annual shareholders meeting. And finally on Mediawatch this weekend, last week here on the programme, we looked at how the social media-driven phenomenon Run It Straight ran straight to the top of the bulletins in the news media here, but it wasn't good news. News cameras captured the first outings of the official competition when two men looked to have been knocked out and hurt in the collision tackling game. And after a Palmerston North 19-year-old died after he was hurt in a birthday party backyard version of the game, Run It was condemned by the Prime Minister, the Police Minister and a whole host of injury experts. And not just here.
Last week, teenager Ryan Satterthwaite died in an impromptu backyard game with friends in New Zealand.
I am hoping that out of this we get some All Blacks, some rugby league players stand up and just express what sort of a dumb idea that this particular game is.
Ryan Satterthwaite's uncle Peter and his plea on Channel 9 News in Australia. But they found Aussie footy fans pretty divided.
Life's dangerous. You know, I feel for the kid, but you know, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow.
And here too, a bit of a backlash has followed short-lived calls for action. On social media, it's a very different story to the news media. For example, YouTube channel Pacifica Rugby pumped up the Run It Straight competition, prompting this comment from one of the users. Well, that was tongue-in-cheek, possibly. The King of the Streets Backyard Scraps cash prize competition that's backed by Kiwi MMA star Dan Hooker also ended up condemned in the news last week, much to the surprise of MMA podcaster Ariel Helwani.
This isn't like doing something in Florida. It seems like New Zealand is pretty tight when it comes to combat-related things.
There's always going to be lefties out there having a cry, but since when did putting gloves on in the backyard, having a punch-up with your mates become illegal?
But the Police Minister and the Prime Minister probably wouldn't think that they'd fall into that category of lefties having a cry. However, on News Talk ZB, Mike Hosking was disappointed to hear Mark Mitchell saying that he was pondering what to do.
Adi Savia, God bless him. Tragedy generally leaves us helpless, but looking to a government is pointless. And a government looking for advice is even more pointless.
Hosking. Well, that depends a bit if the tragedy is preventable. But like Mike Hosking, sports pundit Jamie Wall on Nights with Emile Donovan last Tuesday also cited Adi Savia, telling the media that his own backyard collisions with his brother Julian made him a better rugby player, and Run It, said Jamie Wall, is a legit sport.
I've watched them. You know, I've been entertained by them. To me, it's basically distilling what rugby league is down into one thing.
One thing, yeah.
And taking the thing that everybody kind of wants to watch rugby league for.
I thought rugby league was all about the mazy running and the split-second offloads, but Jamie Wall had this advice for journalists judging Run It Straight.
And perhaps take a bit of a step back and a deep breath and detach ourselves from the somewhat hysterical coverage of it, which is, unfortunately, exactly what sports like this feed off.
Jamie Wall reckoned it would be much better if the media talked to people taking part in Run It Straight about what kind of calculations they were making, rather than just experts who would say it was a bad thing. And with that in mind, one Mediawatch listener got in touch to point out that while critics of Run It Straight were not hard to find in our media, another challenge that was risky and a novelty, and that was not really sport, seemed to be a laughing matter on RNZ National last week.
Sorry, I'm getting the giggles because we're talking about cheese racing. Nathan and I are coming up with which of our friends would do it. We've all got a friend who'd do well in cheese chasing in the competition.
Now, this is that one we're talking about in Gloucester where it goes down the hill, very, very steep.
Indeed, the hill's so steep that some of the competitors somersaulted and broke bones.
There's a lot of tumbling that happens. There's a lot of accidents that happen in this one. It's had various safety concerns. But look, it happened overnight. 3 men's races. A German YouTuber won the first one. Someone from Britain won the second one. But the final men's downhill race was won by Byron Smith, 33 years old, from New Zealand.
At the moment, there's one person staying on his feet. White T-shirt, ginger hair, right at the top. And I think he might have taken it, or has he been pinned to the post by the red T-shirt? Oh, it's close. It's close.
And 24 hours later, he was on Morning Report himself from his hospital bed.
After my interviews, I realised I couldn't really talk, so I had to go to hospital, and it turns out I have a broken rib, some internal bleeding, and a collapsed lung.
Right. Well, I should say congratulations on your victory, but also that sounds like some pretty serious injuries chasing after some cheese.
I guess you could call it that, yeah.
Was that a good idea in hindsight?
I think so. I got 4 kilos of cheese to share out with my friends now, so I'm pretty happy about that, and I'm sure they will be.
But would Byron have risked all for glory and free cheese for his mates if he'd had to pay to stay in hospital for what he told Morning Report was excellent treatment? Well, that's it for this weekend. Thanks to Hayden Donnell for producing, and thanks to you for listening. Hayden and I will be back again next week. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us mediawatch@rnz.co.nz, or you'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X. And you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Mediawatch, PO Box 123, Wellington. I'll be back again next Wednesday with Midweek Mediawatch. Catch you then. In the meantime, follow Mediawatch and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.